Many mainlanders come to buy real estate.
The influx of immigrants from the mainland has had a serious impact on real estate prices.
Many of the properties in the ads are priced at more than $1 million US.
Many rich Chinese mainlanders have bought condos in Hong Kong as investments. This has sent real estate prices skyrocketing in the past decade. A leading US real estate agent cites the average price of a home in Hong Kong at $1.2 million US, highest among big cities around the world.
I'm not saying I don't like to see many mainlanders in Hong Kong, but life has become tougher. They have occupied our places. To be honest, I feel more resentment toward China.
As China's presence grows, the Hong Kong government in April proposed a bill to the Legislative Council that would allow criminal suspects to be handed over to the mainland. Currently does not have an extradition treaty with China. If a criminal suspect from the mainland flees to Hong Kong, it does not have to send the suspect back, even if the Chinese government demands an extradition. But if legislation is revised, it would become possible for suspects to be handed over from Hong Kong to the mainland. Latest demonstrations broke out to protest this idea.
A lot of Hong Kong people do afraid that Hong Kong will become just another cities of just another Chinese cities. The cornerstone of what protects Hong Kong people will simply be gone, will be destroyed.
Some people say China began applying pressure before the demonstration started. A 24-year-old magazine reporter says he feels that Hong Kong's freedom of speech has been diminishing rapidly in the past few years.
Things have grown worse since Chinese President Xi Jinping took office. China has stepped up control over speech by the Hong Kong media. The content of articles is restricted, and we must be careful about the vocabulary we use.
The man says he began sensing this 4 years ago after an incident involving a Hong Kong bookshop. Five people linked to the shop that sold titles critical of the Chinese Communist Party went missing. Later, they were found to have been detained by Chinese authorities. The man says a similar incident occurred close to home. He says a reporter who wrote an article critical of the Chinese government was arrested during a visit to the mainland.
All of Hong Kong media is under heavy pressure. If we criticize the government, we risk being arrested on separate charges at any time.
How do you feel about Hong Kong losing its freedom of speech?
It's a big shock. Hong Kong wouldn't be Hong Kong without free speech.
Demonstrators say they've been acting carefully, worried about surveillance. This man says he switched off the location tracking on his smartphone because he was afraid authorities would follow his movements.
8 to 9, I think.
He also says he uses a Russian social networking service, which supposedly has tighter security, to send messages about the demonstrations.
As we know, in some news they talk about WeChat has some spies, some business in China, and then you have to use it. You have no other method to fix it, and then you have to use. But normally I'm not using it.
Fearing for his safety, his mother at first didn't want him to take part in the protests. But as the influence of the mainland grew stronger, she says she gradually started to support her son, who's taking risks to get his voice heard.
I now support my son. We need to make our case now because we may not have a chance in the future. If we don't act, there will be no hope for the next generation.
Freedom and safety must be guaranteed. If we don't stand up, we'll lose everything. I choose to fight because we all die in the end. Now is the time to stand up and fight.
Concern is growing that Chinaization could undermine Hong Kong's status as a financial hub. Free economic activities are allowed in Hong Kong under the One Country, Two Systems framework. The territory has attracted business people from around the world.
Well, I think there's a lot of companies that were talking about moving their sensitive areas of their businesses to Singapore, for example.
If it becomes more and more towards leaning in China's favor, it could have some impact on the trade war even with the United States if like President Trump were to consider Hong Kong as like a part of China.
Japanese people doing business in Hong Kong are feeling uneasy.
I'm from today's close-up.
Japanese restaurant owner Hiroshi Yoshida has been a Hong Kong resident for 35 years. He says his customers are worried about the territory's future.
People working in finance and affluent people may start moving their assets out of Hong Kong. I hear that some of them have actually started doing that. Others are said to be considering immigrating to Taiwan. If my valued customers flee Hong Kong, it will deal a direct and devastating blow to my business.
More than 25,000 Japanese live in Hong Kong. Many say they sense that Chinaization is progressing.
My child attends a local school. Many families have moved here from the mainland so their children can get a better education. It has become more difficult for Hong Kong natives to enroll their children in local schools.
I heard that a Japanese trading house employee was detained in China for 1 or 2 years. As a company worker myself, I'm worried that it could happen to me.
Rapid Chinization has led to mass protests. We take a look at why people are so concerned.
We asked Professor Ichiro Kourogi, an expert on China, about a series of incidents that have increased anxiety among people in Hong Kong. In 2014, the Hong Kong government virtually banned candidates critical of the Chinese Communist Party from running for the position of the territory's chief executive. This led to a major rally that was dubbed the Umbrella Movement. In 2015, manager and staff of a bookstore selling publications critical of the Communist Party were detained by the Chinese authorities. And in 2018, Chinese police and customs officers set up shop in a Hong Kong train station on a line connecting the territory with the mainland. These incidents seem to indicate steady progress of Hong Kong's Chinization. What do you think is at the root of the perceived threat that Hong Kong people are feeling?
They feel that China is gradually breaking the promises it made in 1997.
Which means?
This, the basic law of Hong Kong, is the wall that protects the territory and guarantees the one country, two systems principle.
The basic law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. It's like the constitution of the territory.
The law provides that, in a long run, each resident of the territory will have a vote in the election of their chief executive, but that's not happening. The law also recognizes freedom of speech and the right to hold rallies. It also says Hong Kong has administrative and judicial independence and China cannot intervene. But China is undermining each of what I just mentioned.
You mean China is breaking the promises it made when the territory was handed over?
Exactly. And now the extradition bill. The residents feel it's the final blow to the wall that protects them. They no longer feel safe.
Would you say until recently the residents had seen the Hong Kong government as a kind of wall to protect them?
They know that their administration cannot resist the mainland government. They now see the two governments as collaborators in suppressing the rallies and arresting protesters.
The biggest rally in the territory attracted 2 million people out of a population of 7.5 million. What prompted so many people to take to the streets? Have things entered a new phase?
Hong Kong faces a change in its political culture. The two systems principle is disappearing. The Hong Kong government labeled the rallies as organized riots. The Chinese government is using the exact same words. They call them organized riots, but have failed to explain what sort of organization is behind them. Use of the word riots provoked deep anger among the protesters. They also use force to put down the rally, something that's unusual for the Hong Kong police.
As you can see in this footage, the law enforcement handled the protesters quite high-handedly. This hasn't happened before.
Exactly. Children in Hong Kong used to view police officers as polite people who would never do anything like this. What they call riots started as a peaceful march, but it turned into a showdown because the police tried to put them down with force. The police came out fully armed from the beginning. This provoked the demonstrators.
You mean the very fact shows how China is strengthening its pressure on the citizens of Hong Kong.
The word organized riots does not suit Hong Kong's political culture. I think the word represents the very image of the territory's Chinization.
Akiko Goba and our Hong Kong Bureau Chief Machi Wakatsuki are in front of the territory's Legislative Council building. Akiko?
While I was on the streets, I felt a strong sense of anxiety among the people of Hong Kong. I took this image of the entrance to the council building just a while ago. About 300 people had gathered to call for a complete scrapping of the extradition bill. Acts of protest continued after the rally that attracted 2 million people. This shows just how angry Hong Kong citizens are. You have covered many rallies in the time you've been in Hong Kong. How do the latest demonstrations differ from the others? I can say the latest ones are different from the previous ones in the way they gained momentum. The extradition bill began to make headlines in February this year. Opposition to the bill soon spread among the citizens. It soon became the talk of the town. Some of the participants were taking part in their first ever rally. For others, they feared it may be the last chance for them to do so. I was stunned to see the residents' strong sense of distrust towards China and the resentment toward the Hong Kong government that does whatever China says. I was also impressed at the wide variety of people present at the rally: children, youths, the elderly. I even met a family with a 2-month-old baby. Some people even said they would have their children emigrate abroad if liberties in Hong Kong are diminished. Are the protests likely to continue even though the extradition bill has effectively been scrapped? I think they will continue in various ways. That's because many of the young participants were connected through social media. There are no charismatic leaders like there were in the umbrella movement 5 years ago. Individuals are acting on their own out of concern about what they should and can do for their own futures. They have secured an apology from the government leader and the effective scrapping of the bill, but some people are not yet satisfied. Rallies will probably continue so long as they feel the need to act.
Some observers say the situation in Hong Kong has become an Achilles heel for China as it tackles trade friction with the United States.
Past leaders let China freely plunder the United States economy and take the crown jewels.
US President Donald Trump is keeping a hardline policy toward China, including in trade negotiations. Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Osaka. Christian Whitten served as an advisor at the US State Department under the Trump administration. He says he thinks Trump can negotiate to his advantage by taking up the issue of Hong Kong.
I think President Trump and Prime Minister Abe politically are in just a strong position going into the G20 in Osaka. So for Trump to raise this issue, which makes Xi look bad, or at least puts him under a little pressure, I think could be a good negotiating tactic.
Wong, and former member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. Mr. Lee will focus.
A U.S. congressional commission that studies China's human rights issues invited a delegation of Hong Kong pro-democracy activists to testify about the extradition bill.
Universal suffrage and the chief executive.
Hong Kong is no longer a place that really protects our human rights and our liberty.
They ought to be raising these issues directly in these trade discussions. I mean, human rights ought to be the centerpiece of our trade dealings with China.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping, who will be meeting with Trump, has in recent years laid out a hardline stance regarding the governance of Hong Kong. At China's National People's Congress last year, the expression Hong Kong people administering Hong Kong, used in past documents, was deleted from activity reports. The omission highlighted China's determination to strengthen its influence on the Hong Kong government. Political commentator Chip Zhao of Hong Kong has been monitoring the relationship between the governments of the territory and the mainland for years. He says the response of the Hong Kong administration and Legislative Council toward the extradition bill carried the heavy weight of China's presence.
Pro-China lawmakers in Hong Kong do not have their own will. They act in accordance with China's wishes. The Hong Kong government must consider both China's interests and the international situation. It has come to light that China has a firm grasp on the core of Hong Kong's governance.
Professor Toru Kurata has been conducting research in Hong Kong for many years. He visited one of the demonstration sites. Kurata says the fact that the demonstrations led to the virtual scrapping of the extradition bill has dealt a blow to Chinese President Xi Jinping.
I believe Beijing perceived its relatively hardline stance as having succeeded in the past. But this time, it became apparent for the first time that the tough stance had failed. So I think the Chinese government is grappling with the big issue of how to re-establish its policy toward Hong Kong.
The Chinese government has sustained a heavy blow over its handling of Hong Kong. But China appears determined to stick to its confident stance, even amid deepening rifts with the United States.
一些西方势力在利用这个问题，在香港兴风作浪，挑动对立。香港是中国的内部事务，不容你们在这里干涉。
What's likely to happen at the US-China summit?
NHK Washington Bureau Chief Hideki Yui, can we expect anything from President Trump?
He is expected to request that China keep the one country, two systems framework, which guarantees freedom of speech for Hong Kong. In trade negotiations, the US is accusing China of broken promises. The Trump administration is frustrated because it believes that China has not kept its promises, such as protecting intellectual property rights and preventing forced technological transfers. Washington thinks that China has broken its promise on Hong Kong as well. The biggest challenge for the US in the trade talks is to persuade Beijing to agree to create a framework that will make China keep its promises. President Trump is expected to put more pressure on President Xi to create such a framework by taking up Hong Kong at their one-on-one meeting. For the US, China is a threat to the international order that is based on freedom and democracy, which it has promoted for years. The US believes that the issue of Hong Kong does not concern the territory alone. It's part of the ripple effect of China's growing influence around the world.
Trump wants to discuss Hong Kong, but how will his Chinese counterpart react? Professor Korogi expects that Xi will dodge the issue by using North Korea as a bargaining chip. Professor, what can we expect?
China will do everything possible to stop Hong Kong from being discussed at an international meeting. It's been trying to prevent Hong Kong from becoming an international issue. So, China could bring up North Korea, which is an easier topic. Discussions won't lead to any substantial solutions for issues concerning the country. But it's a topic both sides can agree to put on the table. Diverting media attention to Pyongyang will help obscure what's happening in Hong Kong. There will be less media coverage. President Xi apparently wanted to attend the G20 summit in high spirits without losing face.
So a visit to North Korea?
Out of the blue.
Hong Kong may have been the reason for the surprise visit to Pyongyang. Now we'd like to try to understand what lies ahead for Hong Kong's Chinization. Professor Korogi, you say President Xi will never loosen his grip on the territory because he aims to create one powerful China. Can you elaborate?
For China, national security and national unity are one and the same. That's why Tibet, the Uyghur region, Taiwan, and Hong Kong have become major issues. Leaders fear that the country could fall apart unless they are addressed. They also fear that Hong Kong will become the center of a pro-democracy movement and that other regions will follow. The government doesn't want people to think it will yield to protests, so it imposes strict media control to keep them in the dark. If Hong Kong is discussed on the international stage, it will add fuel to the flames. Since Xi became president, the government has started using the term overall jurisdiction, which means the mainland has comprehensive control over Hong Kong. It runs counter to high-level autonomy.
Control everything.
Yes, politically, the government is trying to change the framework to the one country, one system. In one word, Chinaization. Taiwan is impacted most by this. The situation in Hong Kong is widely reported there ahead of the presidential election. The protests in Hong Kong put China at a disadvantage in dealing with Taiwan. The central government must be hoping to shift media attention completely